Hamilton and Jefferson had very different upbringings. However, both were monumentally important advisors for Washington. Their upbringing and other factors influenced what they believed should be the foundation for growing the economy of the United States. Hamilton proposed a growth of the nation through domestic manufacturing, whereas Jefferson believed the nation should focus on agricultural endeavors. Jefferson believed that the government should not be involved in private industry, a concept known as laissez-faire economics. Part of Hamilton's economic plan proposed that the federal government pay off debts left from the Revolutionary War by issuing bonds to the public. Americans would purchase the bonds, giving the federal government the funds needed to pay back debts. Hamilton wanted current bondholders and wealthy investors to have a stake in the national government. Jefferson and Representative James Madison opposed paying off current bondholders because often these were investors who had bought bonds with speculation from primary investors at a reduced price. Congress decided to authorize the funding plan. Hamilton also proposed that the government assume the Revolutionary War debts of each individual state, creating instead a national debt that would be paid by the national government, rather than by each state respectively. Northern states supported this because they had outstanding debts. However, Jefferson opposed the assumption of state debt because he feared the strength of the national government, and most southern states had already paid off their debts. The southern states also opposed this because they had paid their debts. The compromise that was reached led to debts being assumed by the national government, and in exchange, the nation's capital would be moved further south to the District of Columbia, also known as Washington, D.C. The last part of Hamilton's economic plan was the creation of a national bank. This bank would control the nation's money, monitor currency, loan the government money when needed, which would spur economic growth, and would serve as a repository for the federal government to deposit money. According to the Constitution, the federal government has the power to create and regulate a national currency, as well as regulate trade. Hamilton argued that a national bank was necessary for the nation to carry out its responsibility of creating currency. Jefferson, however, opposed the creation of a national bank because the Constitution did not specifically delegate power to the federal government to create the bank. Congress passed, and Washington signed, a charter for the establishment of the first bank of the United States. Hamilton pushed for the establishment of the national bank, citing that it was necessary and proper to the exercise of congressional powers to establish a national currency and regulate trade. The creation of the bank was then allowed by the elastic or necessary and proper clause of the Constitution. This clause allows the Constitution to stretch to meet the needs of a growing nation. The use of the elastic clause established the basis for a continuing political disagreement about how the Constitution should be interpreted. Hamilton and the Federalists were more flexible in their interpretation and cited as having a loose construction or interpretation, whereas the Jeffersonian Republicans had a more strict construction of the Constitution in keeping with their distrust of a strong national government. Pause the video here and consider these questions. Can you summarize the differing views of Hamilton and Jefferson on the issues of public credit, the assumption of state debt, and the creation of a national bank? Can you summarize what the necessary and proper clause is? Can you explain the difference between strict and loose interpretation? When you're sure you can confidently answer these questions, move on. Disagreements between the two emerging political factions was exacerbated by Hamilton's proposal that Congress establish a protective tariff. A protective tariff is a high tax on imported goods designed to prompt consumers to purchase the lower-priced goods produced in their home country. You will really need to know and understand what a protective tariff is and how it protects domestic industry. Assume for a moment you want to purchase a pen. You go to the store and find two identical pens, the first made in the United States and the other made in England. The pen made in the United States costs $1.25, and the one made in England costs $1. Which are you going to purchase? Probably the one made in England because they're identical, and the one made in England costs less. Now let's assume the government passes a protective tariff on pens. This will place a tax on the imported pens brought in from England. This will cause the company to increase the cost of the imported pens to maintain their profits. This means when you go to the store to buy the pen, the United States-made pen is still $1.25, but the pen made in England is now $1.50. Which pen are you likely to purchase now? Probably the pen made in the United States. This is how protective tariffs can help protect domestic industry. Make sure you know and understand this concept because it will come up again and again throughout this course. Hamilton proposed that Congress establish a high protective tariff to promote and protect America's emerging industries. Jefferson, however, opposed the protective tariff, arguing that democracy depended on the independence of the citizens, specifically farmers, to buy, sell, and trade goods. Remember, Jefferson believes in laissez-faire economics, where the government is not involved in how private citizens make money. Congress did not pass the protective tariff. However, it continued to cause disagreements between the parties. Whiskey production in the colonies became prevalent during the colonial era. This is partially due to the amount of corn that could be grown in the colonies. Turning grain into whiskey was cheaper and easier than transporting the grain. Perhaps the most serious difference between the parties was an excise tax on whiskey. Hamilton proposed that Congress pass a tax on whiskey, which would raise money for the national government. He also saw this as a way to control the drinking habits of Americans at the time. A tax would increase the cost of whiskey, leading to a decrease in heavy drinking. Jefferson and Madison supported Western farmers who turned their grain into whiskey in order to transport it more easily and cheaply across the Appalachian Mountains to markets in the East. Farmers from Pennsylvania led a tax on tax collectors. This was the first challenge against the authority of the new government. Washington quickly shut down the rebellion, sending in troops. The ability of the government to quell the rebellion demonstrated the strength of the new government to enforce the laws of the nation. It also demonstrated the seriousness of the split between the two political groups. The two-party system developed as a result of differing political positions on these economic issues. The Federalists, supporters of Hamilton and a strong central government, included the wealthy merchants and emerging industrialists in the North, as well as a few elite Southern plantation owners. Federalists interpreted the Constitution loosely, using the elastic clause to give the federal government more power. Democratic Republicans, or Jeffersonian Republicans, were supporters of Jefferson and Madison who believed in a limited central government and strong state governments, because state governments are closest to the will of the people. They were supported by the common man, including rural Northerners, Southerners, and backcountry folk, and supported a strict construction of the Constitution. Jefferson opposed the development of an industrialized country. Pause and think about these questions. Can you summarize what a protective tariff is, and how it protects domestic industry? Can you explain the Whiskey Rebellion and why it's important? Do you know where each party's support base was? Once you're sure you can answer these questions, return to the website and watch the short Jefferson versus Hamilton video and complete the attached chart.